Hello everyone, welcome to the second part of the endocrine physiology, and here we will discuss the mechanism of action of hormones. There are two types of hormones. Non-polar, they are the lipid soluble, so they are water non-soluble, and polar, the lipid insoluble ones or the water soluble. The non-polar hormones like steroid hormones and thyroid hormones, they can go through the bilayer lipid of the cell membrane. That's why they have their receptors inside the cell, in the cell cytoplasm or in the nucleus of the cell. The non-polar hormones are the thyroxine from the thyroid gland and steroid hormones, the ones from the adrenal cortex or the sex hormones from the ovary in female or testes in male. They are cortisol, aldosterone. Anything that ends with a sterone is a steroid hormone, so automatically it is lipid soluble. The testosterone, estrogen, progesterone, all of those are lipid soluble, so they have their receptors inside the cell. The ones that are polar or lipid non-soluble, they cannot go through the lipid bilayer of the cell membrane, so they have their receptors on the cell membrane. And they use a secondary messenger system to induce their action. Those are anything but the steroid and thyroxine, norepinephrine, epinephrine, antidiuretic hormone, oxytocin, and insulin. Let's see the cortisol, which is a steroid hormone. Any steroid hormone or thyroxine, the lipid-soluble hormones, must be carried through a protein carrier in the circulation because the blood is mostly water and those are non-water soluble. So they have to be carried by a protein carrier. They are transported in the blood, and then as they approach the target cell, they are able to enter through the lipid bilayer of the cell membrane, where our receptors are here in the cytoplasm. So here, the hormones is able to enter through the lipid cell membrane, and now it interacts with its receptors found in the cytoplasm. Then what happens? The hormone and the receptor complex will go to the nucleus of the cell, and it's gonna do messenger RNA from the DNA. The messenger RNA will go to the ribosomes to produce proteins. And this is the hormone response. So the hormone response of any lipid-soluble hormone is inducing proteins that will do an action related to the hormone. This takes time. That's why the action of the lipid-soluble hormones are slower than the action of the water-soluble or the lipid non-soluble, because the lipid-soluble produce proteins, and this is a time-consuming process. The water-soluble ones, they change some enzymes, and they do not produce proteins. So the water-soluble or non-lipid-soluble ones bind to receptors on the cell membrane, and there are some types of secondary messengers to induce the actions of those hormones. For example, the adenylate cyclase secondary messenger is used by epinephrine and norepinephrine as they interact with the beta receptors. The secondary messenger phospholipase C is used by epinephrine when it interacts with the alpha adrenergic receptors, and the tyrosine kinase secondary messenger is used by insulin. Those do not produce a protein. They work through changes in the enzymes. So their action is faster than the lipid-soluble ones. Let's go with some review questions. Lipid soluble hormones bind to receptors where they are lipid soluble, so they are able to enter the cell and their receptors are inside the cell. Water soluble hormones cannot pass through the cell membrane, and that's why their receptors are on the cell membrane. Epinephrine is water or lipid soluble. Epinephrine is not a steroid hormone and it's not thyroxine. So it is water soluble. Aldosterone, it has sterone. It is the one produced from the adrenal cortex and it is lipid soluble. Cortisol is also produced from the adrenal cortex and it is a steroid hormone, so it is lipid soluble as well. Antidiuretic hormone is not a steroid and it's not thyroxine, so water soluble as well as insulin. Thyroxine is lipid soluble.